saluer.
Lei lo saluta. Russo anche. Bene. Chers amis, bonjour.
Good morning, dear friends. Thank you for being here. We're going to have a little bit of fun. What that means is that we're going to be listening to people who are real experts on our topic. Plus, we are going to think about and we're going to try to understand situations which may not be easy, although it is very much a must to understand. We have 4 languages today: French, English, Italian, and Russian. 4 languages you can choose from. I wish to welcome you on behalf of the community of Sant'Egidio, and welcome also on behalf of the Paris Diocese. I want to thank the speakers for having accepted to be with us this morning in our discussion. They are sitting next to me around the table. I also wish to thank and welcome Professor Thomas Römer, who is the administrator of this magnificent Collège de France. He is our host. Thank you very much indeed for having hosted us here. Since you are, again, our host today, thank you very much indeed. Also with us is Heinrich Bedford-Strohm, Lutheran bishop, on my left. We have the Metropolitan of Timișoara, Ioan. We also have Professor Samak from Lebanon. On my right, we have Mr. Daniele Garrone, who is an Italian professor. And we also have Ian Ernest, an Anglican archbishop, also based in Italy. So as you can see, we have a top panel this morning, and during our discussion we will try to offer a contribution that you can all benefit from. I also want to thank all participants for having joined us today from a number of European and non-European countries. And I especially want to thank that large group of youngsters who are sitting together over in the back on the right of the hall. Thank you very much for joining us today. And the youth really is a real hope for our future. As a way of introducing our discussion, allow me to share some thoughts with you before I give the floor to our speakers. According to Pope Francis, war means surrendering to evil. Because? Well, because we have to dream of achieving a fair peace. Now, the title of our forum today is Religions and Resistance to Evil. And I truly think we should begin by thinking about these words spoken by Pope Francis. We don't have to surrender to the inevitability of war. We should not accept that inevitability. We have to commit to resisting evil. And that, I feel, is a resource for all of us. The day before yesterday, during the opening ceremony of this event, the mayor of Paris quoted Victor Hugo, who said, "It is up to you to invent love." That's wonderful, isn't it? You have to invent love. I think that is the path we should choose. Above and beyond war, there is love. We have to struggle against the culture of violence because far too often evil has the face of violence, a mad and useless violence, a violence which insists upon us, which makes people lose their humanity. That's what violence does. It takes away humanity from human beings, and therefore we must and want to counter the culture of violence and indifference. Evil has many different faces, violence being one of them. And we must ask ourselves, how can we resist evil? How can we defeat evil? How can we combat this evil which surrounds us so often? I think we must ask ourselves, are we truly forced to use violence to find a solution to our problem? And the answer to that question may be the following. Violence is never our last option. We certainly have to reduce suffering. We certainly have to try to manage relations between countries and people in the most balanced way possible. We have to strive towards the creation of a culture of peace. And we also have to try to embrace what I would define as the weak force of religion. And religion may be weak, but it is a force nonetheless. And religions aren't an obsolete power. Religions always elevate us. They always help us. They always open a path towards imagination. And I'll conclude my introduction by quoting Genesis 4:7. The book of Genesis, chapter 4, verse 7. When the Lord speaks to Cain and he says, if you don't act well, sin will come knocking on your door. But you will be able to dominate it. This concept goes hand in hand with our forum's title. We have to learn to dominate evil, to dominate sin, violence, and war. That is the challenge we face. Thank you very much. And without further ado, allow me to give the floor to Professor Thomas Römer, who is the administrator of the Collège de France. And he is obviously a very well-known personality. We know him well. We are familiar with his publications. We are aware of all of his work in the biblical context. All of his work is very well known indeed. Professor Römer has also written a number of works, maybe not so much on our specific topic, but on topics linked to the main subject of our meeting, and therefore, without further ado, I'd like to hand the floor over to him. Thank you. And good morning. I'm very pleased indeed to see so many young people sitting in this hall. Welcome. And if this is your first time here at the Collège de France, I hope you feel at home. Now, I don't have enough time to talk about the Collège de France because I'm here to discuss another topic. Although I do want to say that the Collège de France is open to everyone. You can come here free of charge. You don't have to register. You can attend courses ranging from biology to theology to Bible studies, because one of our ideas is that everything can be taught, including the Bible. Of course, teaching the Bible here has a lay approach. We don't serve an ideology. We don't serve a religion. And I do realize that sitting next to me, we have many men. It's a very male panel. I don't know if that is linked to the topic we're discussing, although it is true that we don't have diversity. We don't have female representatives, although I'm sure that in the future things will change. Don't feel shy if you see that there are only some elderly gentlemen sitting at this table. It will be up to you to rebalance things. Very well then. As a way of introducing my statements, I won't be discussing religion. I'll be discussing biblical texts, because biblical texts are at the very foundation of Judaism. After the Jewish Bible for Protestants, for Catholics, and for the Orthodox, for the Christian religions, we had the Old Testament, which was somewhat different. Now, I don't have time to go into the details, but let's talk about biblical texts. What does the Bible say about evil? Now, I can't explain what evil is. I don't have enough time to do that. But I would like to begin by making a distinction between polytheistic and monotheistic religions. From the polytheistic point of view, in which the destiny of the universe depends on the actions of a number of deities, evil and suffering and anything else can be traced back to demons, evil demons that man can try to protect him or herself from through amulets and whatnot. Therefore, it's easy to say that there are evil deities, and if you behave badly, they will hurt you. Whereas in a monotheistic religion, things are somewhat more complex, because there is only one God. And therefore, we must ask ourselves, what relationship does this God have with evil? Is God the one sending evil, or is evil outside of God? Is God the all-powerful? And if we consider the Bible in the book of Proverbs, we have the concept that there is a God, a creator, who organizes universe along a certain order, an order which has to be complied with. And those who comply with this order are wise. Those who do not are unreasonable. Therefore, we have the idea that those who are wise, those who behave well, will have a good life, whereas those who behave badly will be the ones who face suffering. Therefore, it is the God of retribution. If you behave well, your life will be good. If you behave badly, then your life will go badly. Is that how things really work, though? Not really. Although some biblical texts do state that that is how things are. There are texts which reflect on this topic. The book of Job, are you familiar with it? It has a narrative of sorts. It has a dialogue between Job and his friends, who try to convince him of the fact that all of the evil happening to him is due to the fact that he sinned. But Job says, well, I did nothing wrong. Therefore, I don't understand why it is that I suffer, why I have to face the suffering. And his friends insist and say, well, there can be no other explanation. You're the one who has sinned. And God doesn't say anything for the time being. And then Job will provoke the Lord by saying, you're a sadist because you feel pleasure in torturing me when I have done nothing. And the Lord then answers to Job. And what is it that he says? First of all, he says that there are plenty of things in the world. He considers a long list of animals that man cannot dominate to explain that man isn't at the center of the universe. And then God also mentions the Leviathan and the Behemoth. You know what they are? They are monsters of sorts. The Leviathan is a kind of dragon, a manifestation of evil, of chaos, and the Lord always pushes him back, which means that the Lord pushes evil back. But does Job really understand what the Lord is telling him? Because he answers by saying, well, I'm not sure I understand what you're telling me. And then we have another story about Job, where Job's evil stems from a bet of sorts between God and Satan. Now, who is Satan? Satan then became the devil. But initially, Satan was an accuser of sorts. An image in which you have the Lord in his celestial court with his ministers around me, and he is one of those who accuse him. And he says, well, is Job really loyal to you? Is he faithful to you? Try to treat him badly, and you'll see that he will no longer serve you. And therefore, Job's suffering can be explained by a bet between God and Satan. Now, Satan is still dominated by the Lord because he is one of his ministers, so to speak. But we will try to drive evil out by saying that Satan put this idea in God's head. Therefore, Job's condition is a test of sorts. God, therefore, is testing Job. He takes away his children, his wealth, and contrary to his wife, Job resists, and then everything ends up well. He finds his children, and everything has a happy ending. So this would be the trend. Evil doesn't come from God. Evil comes from his minister, Satan, who in turn will have a brilliant career in Christianity, more so in Christianity than in Judaism. Now, Satan is also a way of managing evil. We say, well, God isn't evil, Satan is evil. Therefore, we have this duality, this dual vision where on the one hand you have God, who is good, and on the other hand you have Satan. And this is a dual view which already existed in the 5th century before Christianity, in Persian times, according to whom there was a good God and a bad God called Auramanyu, who was the leader of all the lesser demons. It's a pretty simple way of saying that evil stems from the forces of evil, which have to be countered. But in the Bible, there's a text which says no, that is not how things are. If there are evil forces against which we have to combat, that means that God isn't the all-powerful. And therefore there is a text in the book of Isaiah, which dates back to the Persian era, which says that the prophet speaks on behalf of Yahweh, the God of Israel, and he says, I am Yahweh, and there are no others. I am the one who creates light and dark. I create good and I create evil. And therefore, I am the one who creates evil. I am Yahweh, and I'm capable of doing all this. I can create good and evil. And that's where the concept that evil comes from God emerges. In conclusion, what we can state is that the Bible hasn't a systematic approach on the topic of evil. The concept of the all-powerful God is one thing. In certain texts, he has a certain autonomy. In other texts, evil is explained as if it were a retribution of sorts. We have mention of that in the New Testament. Are you familiar with the story of the healed blind man? And Jesus is asked, is he the one who sinned, or were his parents the one who sinned? It's almost as if we were always trying to find a justification to a disease or to evil as if it were a divine sanction of sorts. But then there's the opposite view, which says that things go differently, which means that there is a different approach to evil, and this different approach is something that can be found in the Bible, but also throughout the history of philosophy and theology, all the way up to the present day. One of the definite answers to this question, in fact, is still very far from being achieved, and therefore we still have to wait for somebody to give us that answer. Thank you.
Merci, Professor Römer.
Thank you, Professor Römer, the administrator of the Collège de France. Thank you for giving us a very brief yet very efficient overview. Thank you for having raised this question. Can we continue to have the opinions we have? What are the limits of our opinions? Let's see what our other speakers have to add to that. And therefore, I would now like to give the floor to Bishop Heinrich Bedford-Strohm. He is a Lutheran bishop, and he is a professor of theology. And he was also the president of the Council of Evangelical Churches in Germany. He is now the moderator of the World Council of Churches, which brings together 352 churches in a number of countries around the world. It's a major institution indeed that this bishop belongs to. Over to you.
Thank you very much. It is actually a quite special occasion to speak about resistance against evil at a conference with the title Imaginez la paix, Imagine Peace. In a way, those two titles, they show in a nutshell the whole complexity of our theme. We struggle with how to react to the extreme brutality, for example, of October 7, of those murders, but also the cruel execution of the hostages just a few weeks ago. At the same time, there is good reason to deplore the completely disproportionate response of the Israeli government to the Hamas attacks. The bombing of a densely populated piece of land, chasing millions away from one place to the other and leaving over 40,000 dead, many of them children. Both actions, those by Hamas and those by the Israeli army, claim to resist evil. And a just peace, that is what I believe. Maybe I can say what we believe. A just peace can never be achieved by weapons or bombs. It must always include a fair account of both sides' interests on the basis of rules in accordance with international law. In order to resist evil, we need something like a just policing. That's an expression we sometimes use. Also in international conflicts, which means a protection of international law with even military force as an ultima ratio. But the danger is extremely high, and we experience it in so many violent conflicts, that the military logic takes completely over, and buries all efforts to put a stop to violence and bloodshed and imagining peace. As World Council of Churches, 120 countries is where our 352 churches come from. We try to engage in activities of reconciliation. In many countries, we have just had an executive committee meeting in Colombia, where the government has asked us to be an official accompanier of the peace process between the government and the guerrilla. So we put our meeting into that context in order to, and had many talks with them in order to try to support that peace process. But of course also in Israel and Palestine. We have member churches there, of course. And we plead for overcoming the walls, the big walls that separate us from feeling empathy, not only for our own people, but also for the other side, which is a crucial prerequisite for opening doors to a peace process. We are active in Sudan, of course in Ukraine, where we have visited the leadership of the churches there who are against each other, and of course also including Russia, and try to open the door, at least as Christians that relate to Christ rather than to politics as a first loyalty, in order to at least create some moment of difference to the military logic we experience so much. Resistance against evil in international conflicts demands a realistic account of the necessities of using protective violence, but also of its limits. Resistance, however, can also be a theme arising within a country. When a government becomes so evil that an ethics of responsibility might even demand violence to overthrow this government in order to prevent more evil. Even pacifists can come to the conclusion that it would be irresponsible to stick with their principle of non-violence, that such principled pacifism would actually mean, if that principled pacifism would actually mean the death of thousands or even millions of people, innocent people. The most prominent example is the German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who, as I have read, seems to be the most read German theologian worldwide. So many of you might know him. He was a pacifist. And in my view, he remained a pacifist to the end of his life. Nevertheless, he became part of the conspiracy against Adolf Hitler, where the German resistance tried to kill Adolf Hitler. The assassination attempt on July 20, 1944 failed. They were all executed, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer was hanged on April 9, just a few weeks before the end of the war, 1945, in the concentration camp of Flossenbürg. Bonhoeffer carefully reflected the ways in which Christians must act towards the state in different situations, and envisioned the possibility of resistance as early as 1933, many years before he actually would actively engage in such resistance himself. In April 1933, with the first boycott of Jewish businesses on April 1, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right after that, gave a lecture to pastors in Berlin, and in this lecture he clearly names the injustice done to the Jews. He describes 3 ways in which the church must exercise its responsibility to the state. The first one, simply holding the state responsible, saying what is wrong. Secondly, the service to the victims of the state's action. And he says the church is unconditionally committed to the victims of any social order, even if they do not belong to Christian community. And the third way is not only to put bondage on the wounds of the victims under the wheel, but to fall into the spokes of the wheel itself, to stop the production of victims. For Bonhoeffer, the third option increasingly moved to the center. His reflections on Gandhi's nonviolent resistance, but then increasingly also his reflection on tyrannicide as a means of falling into the spokes of the wheel, must be seen in this context. In his later manuscripts, published as ethics and as letters and papers from prison, he implicitly but nevertheless intensely reflected his decision to participate in the plot against Hitler. We become guilty if we plan the killing of a person, but we might have to consciously become guilty by violating the commandment not to kill if this is the only way to prevent much bigger evil. For Bonhoeffer, being ready to become guilty for the sake of others can be the act of responsibility that is needed. The example of the German resistance against Hitler is an impressive example for the plausibility of Bonhoeffer's thoughts. You just have to imagine, if the tyrannicide had been successful, the lives of millions of people would have been saved. Soldiers in the battlefields, civilian people, victims of bombings, but above all, millions of victims of the Holocaust. They could have been saved if the attempt had been successful. The call to resistance is always in the danger to be misused. A current example is the misuse of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's life and work in American politics. Christian nationalists played a major role when a violent mob attacked the US Capitol on January 6, 2021. That day, stop, that is a sign for me that I come to the conclusion in 2 minutes. Christian nationalists played a major role when a violent mob attacked the Capitol on this famous day of January 6. That day showed that American nationalists do not shy away from violence in their contempt of their political opponents and democratic institutions. They misuse the example of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's resistance to justify such action. A key role in this plays Eric Metaxas, author of a popular biography of Bonhoeffer, who on the basis of this flawed account of Bonhoeffer explicitly embraces such Christian nationalism, including the possibility of using violence, as the January 6 perpetrators did. The resistance against the mass murderer Hitler is put on the same level as the resistance against a democratically elected government. The absurdity of this misuse becomes clear when one looks at how fervently Dietrich Bonhoeffer himself criticized nationalism. And I just quote a sermon in New York in 1930. He warned that Christians should never forget that they have brothers and sisters not only in their own people, but in every people. If the people of God were united, he proclaimed, no nationalism, no hate of races or classes could execute its design, and then the world would have peace forever and ever. I conclude, resistance against evil and imaginer la paix must always be related to each other. If the resistance level is being used to justify brutal violence, be it the cruel killing of innocent hostages by Hamas, or the attempt to overthrow a democratic government in order to establish an authoritarian regime in the USA, then it is irreconcilable with imagining peace. Peace always includes the minimization of violence and the vision of a life of all people in human dignity. There are good reasons to affirm that resistance must be non-violence. At the same time, there's good reasons to put people above principles and stand up for human dignity, even if it includes to become guilty. As Christians, we know that if we confess our guilt, we can hope for God's forgiveness. Thank you.
Merci. Évêque Bedford-Strohm.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for reminding us once again of the importance of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I'm certain that there will be questions for you from the audience, but thank you truly for your contribution. I will now hand the floor over to the Orthodox Metropolitan from Timișoara, Romania, Ioan. He studied at the Biblical Institute of Jerusalem and was then ordained bishop in Romania. He's a dear friend of the community. He often participates in our meetings. The floor is yours.
Grazie.
pace,
Thank you very much. Peace and love between people and nations. Man is a musical instrument of peace. This is what Clemente Andresino said in his book, Pedagogue. One of the most important duties of man in society is to realize the sacred ideal of peace. Peace is a gift of God, the gift that God has bestowed on humanity. He wants people on earth to live together in the same spirit of peace of those who live in the heavens. God has created an earthly world following a heavenly model. Peace and love are intertwining. You can't love unless you've got peace in your heart. That is why it is not possible to put in practice the commandment of love towards your neighbor everywhere on the planet without being a man of peace. Peace and love are brother and sister, born of the grace of God. God has divided the earth for all his children, given them part of his kingdom. No one has bought their own land. This was actually a gift of God. What's your land? What's your homeland? A gift of God, creator of heaven and earth. Homeland and gifts of peace from the Almighty. So why would you steal the gifts I was given by God, my homeland and my peace? Homeland and peace are sacred gifts. They can't be negotiated. They can't be disposed of, because they are the gift of mercy and the goodness of God. For me, stealing the homeland and stealing peace is equivalent to stealing my God. Oh man, what have you done for leaving me in this world with no land, with no peace? The blessed Augustine stressed the fact that also at his time, homeland and peace were stolen, and he said, "You're fighting wars, and broadening the boundaries of the state by subjecting other peoples is happiness only for the evil." And this is a quote from St. Augustine. Seeing with what severity the blessed Augustine is judging those who steal similar gods of God, homeland and peace, shows how evil and dishonest these people are. Do you believe that the opinion would be different today, thinking of those who are stealing the land or stealing peace from their neighbors? And it's also an exhortation for us not to stay idle when faced with what's happening in contemporary society, and to defend with our word and with our prayers these sacred gifts that were bestowed on our neighbors. Today, it seems that weapons are speaking in our place. Prayer to God, who is the source of love and peace, is consoling us whereas weapons are shedding blood and causing death. But let's not blame only those cold and inert metals, rather those consciences that are being fed by the innocent blood of our neighbors. Maybe the most profitable industry in the world is the production of weapons. So they actually make profit out of blood, out of wounds, out of death. Mankind, human society, do they really need this profit today? Christ came to the world to bring his gift of peace, and today we are sending him away with tanks and fighters. How many schools, how many hospitals could be built with the money spent to build a tank or a fighter aircraft? You can't reach peace with weapons, but with words of wisdom and prayer to God. There's a new idea today. There's a new trend, that of building deterrent weapons. What are these weapons made of? I'm telling you, bread. They are made of bread, the bread of the poor and the migrants that are looking for another land, for another homeland. How much spiritual blindness today in our society. Those who lose their land, those who lose peace, are about to lose their identity. Today we see that because of climate change, streams, rivers and lakes have dried out. And what did men think? Let them be filled with blood. Today, rivers of blood are flowing, but also rivers of people that leave their homeland to reach other countries. There are millions of mothers with children knocking on the doors of other countries who are not welcomed. They come from fire, and we don't welcome them in our home. We don't open the doors of a brittle peace in which we are living. If people don't open the doors, let's at least encourage them to open their hearts, asking God, who has given us peace, to listen to our sincere prayers for peace. Dear diplomats, don't negotiate peace among the peoples of God without the principles and values of peace. There's no true peace other than the one given us by God. Encouraging war is a tremendous step back in the evolution of human society. Abusing science, which is an instrument of progress, is an immoral act. Science doesn't mean to harm, rather heal the wounds of man. Leaders of the world, do not use science as a weapon against the peoples you are leading. People want to live in peace, and paradoxically, some of their leaders want their division. It is cynical to watch war live on television. how many directors are still amongst us. Let's educate the younger generations to the spirit of dignity and equality of all people, regardless of their ethnic origin or faith. Our sacred sentiments towards our homeland and peace should lay the foundations for the education of younger generations, so that peace is the aspiration of every people. Today, more than ever, human reason is calling for us to settle the conflicts in the world and have peace among peoples based on wisdom and love. May peace and love be amongst us and in all the hearts that are beating today on earth. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the Metropolitan. Thank you for sharing these words with us, which certainly come from his heart, the heart of a pastor who is certainly worried about the violence which is overshadowing peace everywhere. And after this hearing his remarks, which were very prophetic, we can now try to better understand how, through a simple dream of peace, we can head towards a future of peace. And to do that, I'd like to give the floor to Daniele Garrone, who is a scholar of the Bible, who teaches at the University of Rome. He is an expert in the New Testament, and he is a major representative of biblical studies, along with the Metropolitan, of course. So the floor now goes to Daniele Garrone, who is also the president of the Federation of Evangelical Churches in Italy since 2021. Over to you. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and good morning. I'm not going to be reading what the interpreters received. I will try to summarize my concepts into 4 different points. And I apologize to all the French speakers for my accent. Now, religion and resistance to evil. Somebody yesterday in another forum said that this is a difficult topic to discuss. Some 50 or 60 years ago, we may have thought that the evolution of modernity would have eventually led us to a secularized city. And Harvey Cox wrote a well-known book on this topic, The Secularized City. We thought that religions would have lost their importance through the development of history. But things didn't quite go that way. In fact, we're seeing a revitalization of religions with a strong social influence, and also with a number of stances which are often intolerant and aggressive. And in this context, Europe is an exception. And Italy is an exception too, because even in Italy we have secularization rates which are similar to Sweden. In the rest of the world, however, religions are once again present. Now, I don't have time to give you some examples, but as a Protestant, I will try to focus on examples that only have to do with our churches. For instance, in the United States, the so-called liberal churches are losing influence, they're losing their membership, while at the same time we have millions of evangelicals and Christians who have an apocalyptic vision, and incredible ones at that. That's another way of saying that in some of these images, God is more alive and more combative than ever. The second point I'd like to mention is that also in the second half of the last century, in the Christian world, we saw the rise of ecumenism. Nobody would ever imagine that, would ever have imagined that. Ecumenism, which isn't simply seen as a specific context within Christianity, but as a dimension of sorts. We also invented interreligious dialogue. You may remember what the situation was like in the past. In the past, we only had controversies between the various Christian confessions, heated discussions, and all of the other religions were considered to be false religions. Therefore, there was an incredible rift. Ecumenism and interreligious dialogue on the one hand, and on the other we had religions which in certain contexts would take part in conflicts, and they would disseminate violence. And this is a contradiction which has to be analyzed carefully. Now, moving on to the third point. Nowadays, at least here in the West, all of the most important Christian churches are openly in favor of human rights, democracy, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience. And they're also in favor of equality between men and women. Now, I may sound critical now, but sometimes the words spoken by our leaders are almost a way of saying that we, churches, invented human rights. And sometimes we also state that human rights were already present in the Bible, that we have always known that that is how things were. I think we should re-explain this concept. What we should say, in fact, is that Christian churches, which now speak in favor of human rights, have converted to human rights over time. And they did that even quite late, in fact. And I could share some examples regarding Catholics and Protestants to go back to what we were saying earlier regarding freedom and the freedom of conscience. In the past, we used to say that it was the freedom to make mistakes, whereas we cannot be free to make mistakes if we are aware of the truth. That was the thought back then. However, I think that this is a topic which should be dealt with very seriously. We often say that we run the risk of exploiting God, using God as an excuse for nationalism and political interests, and so on. Although we do have to recognize the fact that there is a temptation in religion as such. Let me explain. We don't necessarily have to serve political or ideological interests. We can also be evil and be violent in the name of God to promote God's cause. That's something which happens. And what religions are tempted by is to say that they are the owners of the truth, the only truth. They claim that the Lord has shown me the truth, and therefore I will have to become a soldier to promote the truth of God for everyone, applying that to everyone. Which brings me to my last point before I leave you in peace. Let's think of blasphemy as a category. Blasphemy in the history of the Christian West. People were killed and burned for blasphemy. Now, the point is that that which is blasphemous to me may be another person's faith or confession. And the idea that we would no longer see religious differences as blasphemy was something which only happened with the Enlightenment. And for many years, the churches had to be subject to enlightenment, which means that there is also a religious evil. A religious evil does exist. We cannot be under the illusion that religions are always good, because one can be religious and evil at the same time. Therefore, people who are religious aren't always good. You can also have religious people who are evil. Now, in the Discourse on the Mountain, God appears to contradict the title of our panel, because it's almost as if he doesn't want to allow us to defend ourselves from evil, with the words, tooth for tooth and eye for an eye. I tell you that you cannot resist evil. What does that mean? What does it mean to not resist evil? There is a philological issue in the translation of this verse here. Let's drop all of the history of the antithesis, because, as you know, a lot has been said about this verse. We had the ancient and cruel law of the God of the Old Testament, and then the arrival of Jesus, who changed everything. You know, a lot has been said about this. But what I do want to say at this point is that when we say that we have to turn the other cheek, I think there is a matter of interpretation which has to be carefully analyzed in this day and age. What does it actually mean to turn the other cheek? Do we have to take that statement literally, which is what the early Christians did when they did not want to serve in Rome's army, for instance? Therefore, how valid would that statement be today? Would it only refer to an interpersonal relation between human beings, or can those words be also used to draft a program and to transform our legal and political structures? As soon as Christianity expanded in the West, a number of its positions were abandoned over time. But then we also had the heretics. Or certain radical figures, all the way up to Tolstoy. Albert Schweitzer and Tolstoy said that this verse, the fact that we shouldn't resist evil, they claim that this is the expression of the heart of Christianity. And of course, the words of St. Augustine also come to mind, who was mentioned this morning. We have always made a distinction between interpersonal relations and our responsibility towards others, be it by a state or a judge or the head of a family. In other words, all of these aspects should be restudied in depth. And I'll conclude by sharing a thought. We should refrain from quoting this verse, as is often done wrongly, because we often say, I'm telling you to turn the other cheek because that is what Jesus said. What I mean by that is that far too often, those of us who aren't exposed to war, those of us who live peaceful lives, are the ones who tell others that they should be nonviolent. And things don't always work that way. I am reminding you that you have to turn the other cheek because that is what Jesus said. What I mean by that is that in this day and age, I'm not sure how we can resist evil, but we should at least try to be guided towards a painful ethics of responsibility and not an ethics based on general principles or generalized solutions, especially when we are the ones who suggest these solutions to others.
Merci, Professor Garrone.
Thank you, Professor Garrone. Thank you, very much for sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you for touching upon a number of crucial issues. I was very struck by your idea, according to which God doesn't need anyone to defend him, because of course God defends himself. And along with him, all those who embrace the cause of peace, love, and justice. Thank you very much indeed. I'd now like to give the floor to Professor Mohammed Samak, who is on my left. Professor Samak is someone we know very well, because back in 1986 he was already present in Assisi. He was there, together with Pope St. John Paul II, and he had the huge fortune of opening our meetings. Our meetings, in fact, have always been a reiteration of what Pope John Paul II did in Assisi back in 1986, and he was present. So he is a first-hand witness of that very first edition. The professor is a political counselor of the Lebanese Grand Mufti, and he is also the president of the Islamic Christian Committee for Dialogue. He is a Sunni, and he has directly participated in the drafting of the document signed by Pope Francis and by Imam al-Tayyib, the Imam of Al-Azhar, on peace, on human fraternity for world peace and living together. Which means that he is certainly an expert, but he is also a witness.
Well, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to be here to speak to you. Our moderator kindly started this session by referring to the concept of inventing love. I am a Lebanese. I come from a country of 18 religious communities. And the Middle East, as you know, is one of the hottest regions in the world, still up to date. So in Lebanon, we were able to invent hope, the culture of hope, to live together and to build a common future in spite of all these differences. As you know, Lebanon is today on the way to become Gaza number 2. And the whole international conscience should be aware that this symbol of living together, which is very live, very vivid in Lebanon, should be protected. And we leave it to your conscience. Now, to begin with the topic of this session, I don't know how religion can be used to resist evil when religion itself is considered by many as the evil. Besides this, hell to X is heaven to Y. We have been through humanity have been through difficulties and catastrophes, let me say. religion was considered to be the reason of it or the way that led to these conflicts. Now, let me tell you how religion itself looks at itself. Let me quote the German theologian Hans Küng. Hans Küng said, who died in 2021, he said in his book, Moral Value in Religion, which he really one of the most scholarly books about religions and values and moral values. But he said that no peace between states unless there is peace between religion. Now, contrary to this, the American theologian George Well said that peace is unable to protect itself. So, no peace between religion, on the contrary to what Küng said, no peace between religion unless there is peace between states. So we have two conflicting theories here regarding the role of peace in international relations. Now, I have other quotation from Martin Niemöller, it's a German theologian. In 1965, he said, when Hitler attacked the Jews, I was not a Jew, so I didn't care. When Hitler attacked the Catholics, I was not a Catholic, so let it pass. When Hitler attacked the unions, I was not part of the union. So, but when Hitler attacked the evangelicals, there were nobody to stand with me. Now, this is happening in a different way in the Middle East. And I hope you can realize the danger of being silent to what is happening in the Middle East, especially in Gaza. The concept was about to recreate a new understanding. We Muslims, let me say openly and open heart, we learned from the Catholic Church how to criticize ourselves and how to rebuild our concept, new concept accordingly. We learned from the Vatican II. We learned from Nostra Aetate, that was a reconciliation between the Catholic Church and the other churches, and between the Catholic Church and other religions, including Islam, Judaism, and other beliefs. And the courageous approach that was in Nostra Aetate, the document published in 1965, was a real teaching book for all religious communities who are looking to correct or to find a new path in the 21st century. As you know, what happened in the Middle East by extremism and terrorists who hijacked Islam and used Islam in the against Muslims themselves and against Christians and from different denominations was something really shocked everybody. But I have to confess that the reaction took some time to prove itself. But when it came with a new concept of understanding Islam, of producing new concept of Islam. Conferences held in Islamic cultural centers and religious centers like Al-Azhar, where 5 documents have been published by Al-Azhar regarding relations between Muslims and the other. The documents of Abu Dhabi, which came at the last step of this correcting the image of Islam within Islam in the first place and with the others. We learned actually, as I said, from Nostra Aetate how to criticize the misconcept of religion and Islam. And I had the chance, and have the honor, let me say, to participate in 2 synods in the Vatican, one about Lebanon, the message of Lebanon, by John Paul II, Saint John Paul, and the second by Benedict XVI about the Middle East. Now, in 2010, in the synod about the Middle East, there are 2 main pillars came out from this synod. The one says that freedom of religion is a principle to relations between different communities in the Middle East. Freedom of religion, freedom of belief. And the second is not tolerance relations, but rights, equal rights. Tolerance, as you know, in the German philosopher Nietzsche says that tolerance is an insult to the other. So we don't want relations to be based on tolerating the other, but on respecting his rights, equal rights of citizenship. So the Muslim documents focus on these 2 points: freedom of religion and nationality, equal citizenship, to rebuild the countries of the Middle East on these 2 principles. And the documents came rushed from different corners of the Islamic world, from Mecca to Marrakesh, where the concept of equality, equal rights, equal citizenship, religious freedom, to be the basis of rebuilding the Middle East. Now, this has been a new movement. We paid a very high price when the extremists and who committed crimes against humanity all over the Middle East, against Christians in the first place, and then against Muslims who opposed these movements. Now, at the time, we have a new opening, new horizon, to rebuild our communities in accordance with these new principles of freedom, religious freedom, of citizenship, of equal citizenship, we have the problem in Gaza. And now in my country, I don't know if I can go back to Beirut, if my plane can land in Beirut anymore or whatever. So there is this conflict between rebuilding and destruction, building bridges and turning your back to the other. The Middle East, an example for all these hard experiences, let me say, experiences. And we believe that Christian-Muslim relations in Lebanon, in spite of all the difficulties we face, are a good example to be followed in the Middle East and elsewhere. As the Secretary General of the Christian-Muslim National Committee for Dialogue in Lebanon, as you know, is of 18 religious communities, we are proud to believe in the message that Jean Paul described Lebanon with. And this message is to promote the culture of accepting and respecting differences with different religions. Thank you.
Merci, cher ami, pour
Thank you. Thank you, dear friend, for these words so filled with wisdom and emotion. This shows once again that the meetings organized by the community of Sant'Egidio for peace are truly places of friendship, places of harmony, places of coexistence amongst us all. We wish you could come back to Lebanon in peace, at least. When it comes to the possibility of safely traveling, we're really grateful because you've given us an idea of what dialogue means, of how important a concrete dialogue between religions is. These 18 religious institutions you have just talked about and to which you belong, grouped together in a national committee, account for the importance of dialogue. Thank you truly. And now I will hand the floor over to the Anglican Archbishop Ian Ernest, who was born in Mauritius. Since 2019, he has represented the Archbishop of Canterbury at the Holy See, and is also leader of the Anglican Church in Rome. The floor is yours.
These moments of fraternity in Paris, graciously offered to us by the Sant'Egidio community and the Archdiocese of Paris, bring about an overflowing sense of hope that is overwhelming and reassuring. But we have to note very sadly that in a short span of time, this 21st century has seen an unexpected growth of hatred and exclusion. Therefore, as these evils or wrongdoings knock at our doors, we can no longer afford to put in peril the lives of innocent people. This observation calls on me, and I hope on you too, and on the younger generation present this morning, to be committed to an active role of resisting those evils of hatred and exclusion and violence. I wish here to quote John Stott, an Anglican priest and theologian, a biblical scholar, who in the book Issues Facing Christians Today affirms that peacemaking is a divine activity. As many of us, irrespective of our religious persuasions, claim to be children of God, it would be good. It would be an opportunity for us to seize this moment of fraternity, to engage in peacemaking, as it will help us to bear witness to a God from whom peace overflows. This is what religions stand for, meant to guide us to fulfill God's loving intentions for our world. Peacemaking is the way by which we can fight for the truth that comes from God. As I am asked to speak about religions and resistance to evil, I will argue that the way that leads us to situations of freedom, of the ability to embrace the other, it will only come if we strive to be witnesses and instruments of peace. But we have a price to pay, as it calls us to be worthy of a cause, that of judiciously witnessing to the truth, which invites us to constantly commit ourselves to be humble, to be patient, to be present to the other, and not to use force, whether verbal or physical, against enemies. But I would like to do things simply, defining these two words. What I do understand by the word religion and resistance to evil. From my understanding, it consists of a but I would like to do things simply, defining these two words. What I do understand by the word religion and resistance to evil. From my understanding, religion consists of a set of beliefs, a form of worship, a ritual, prayer, and a code of moral behavior, which allows us to develop true faith in God. Whereas resistance to evil can be defined as an opposition to the demands of human thoughts. I underline that. Of human thoughts and ways which do not correspond to God's requirements. Friends, if we like people to be kind, if we like people to be compassionate towards us, if we like people to listen to us, it would be appropriate to do the same. And it is only then that we can love peace and do justice. This perfect response to the appeal from a peace-making God is of universal application, relevant to any nation, religion, in any century. So, our priority as believers who trust in a loving and caring God is to show by our deeds and life that justice, compassion, and religious practices are not mere concepts or ideals. Mahatma Gandhi, who closely followed the teachings of Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount, I quote, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." He reached out. These words urge on him to reach out to those afflicted by the evils of unjust structures by providing a program of action in favor of nation Muslim unity, for the removal of untouchability, for gender equality, and the Qadi movement to create jobs, and as a relief program for the poor masses in Indian villages. This is a perfect example how we could resist the evils of our time. And to resist evil, the power of love and of peacemaking enabled us to control our own feelings and call on us to choose what kind of life we want to live in this world. And we have to listen to these young people to know what kind of life they would like to enjoy in this world. But it is rather unfortunate that we are part of a generation that lays more emphasis on rights rather than on duties. A few decades ago, as I was growing up, we were taught that we should act with a spirit of respect and that of an accountability to others. Today, unfortunately, we are obsessed with personal enrichment, even if it entails our encroaching upon the rights of others and discriminating against them. This obsession, unfortunately, opens the door for evil thoughts and ways to creep in our minds, to creep in our souls and our hearts. Friends, how are we to resist this situation when evil ways and thoughts seem to win the day? It is true that all religions, as it was said during this panel, that the pathway to follow is the one which leads to respecting and recognizing the other as a child of God. If duly followed, peace and justice will prevail, but they seem to elude out of our hands and at all levels. The frequent terrorist attacks, the persecutions on religious grounds, the cruel displacement of people, and the irresponsible stewardship or management of God's creation are the evils we face today. We are still locked, in spite of all the scientific technological advances of our time, we are still locked in hatred, in mistrust, and irresponsible conduct. Are there rays of hope to resist evil ways and thoughts? Are our religions suitable to face these evil thoughts and ways? Yes. Though that conflict rages in an increasingly frantic world, we can also note that the quest for inner peace seems ever more urgent. The rise of interest in spirituality, especially amongst the younger generation, attests to this strong desire for inner calm and harmony. One young person in Rome, which I met in a religious forum recently, confided to me that he feels suffocated by the religious environment he lives in, and that he is far from discovering the real essence of what religions stand for. So we, religious leaders, are called to revise our teaching methods and approach so that we may respond in a most effective manner the challenges and needs of people, of our young people who are thirsty of the truth that brings freedom, that brings hope, because of that longing for truth, freedom, and hope. We have now a fertile soil to sow seeds that will enable us to be instruments of peace, justice, and love. We will then be instrumental in helping this present generation and the future generation of leaders to see themselves as builders of a new world which can resist evil thoughts and ways. In the Old Testament, Prophet Micah describes in a wonderful way images of peace, and this should awaken in us a strong desire for peaceful coexistence. We are called from the scriptures to envision a future with God, teaching us what He wants us to do and how everyone would live in peace with each other. I will quote Prophet Micah. He has showed you, O man, what is good, what the Lord requires of you, to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. Unquote. With a long history of violent opposition to peace and justice, which is unfortunately still prevailing in some parts of the world, all religions are solemnly called by God to fight the evil ways and thoughts of our times. Inter-religious dialogue should not limit itself to polite conversations. It should urge on us to solemnly see how we are called by God to fight the evil ways and thoughts of our times. So it is our role as the stakeholders of our respective religions to show the way how to fulfill what God requires of us. Friends, if religious leadership is not exercised through true allegiance to God, then power corrupts and prevents us to sow seeds of peace, justice, and to resist evil ways and thoughts. Today, our experience of peacemaking as religious bodies can be a challenging route to take. We may face fierce opposition with the consequence of being alienated. But as we live through this experience, service, for me, is the key word, is to be the most striking signs of religious life. Service, friends, has been the keynote of a great peace and non-violence activist, namely Pastor Martin Luther King. This is what he says, I quote, "If any of you are around when I die, and if you get somebody to deliver the eulogy, tell him not to talk too long. Tell him not to mention that I have a Nobel Peace Prize. This is not important. I would like somebody to mention on that day that Martin Luther King tried to give his life in serving others," unquote. So, dear friends, to resist evil, we are all invited, irrespective of our religious belonging, to serve others without counting the cost. We have heard the witness of that young Afghan lady on Sunday. The costs are very high. We live in challenging times as our communities and the wider world seem to be divided as never before. Today, our worst enemies are lies, rumors, self-centeredness, pride, hard-heartedness, fearfulness, and senseless warfare. Our faith at times may seem too little to fight these harsh realities, which come from ways and thoughts which are not from God. What should we do to conclude? The call of God is not only to preach peace. The call of God is not only to make peace just for the sake of fulfilling an ideal, but to embody it, to live it, and to put it into practice into our daily life. Just see how we are living in Paris at the moment. We greet each other. We share with each other things which are important to build up relationships which are definitely important for a building of a better world. Therefore, our practice of religion, if imbued with a spirit of humility, of integrity, service, and truth, will certainly reveal the loving face and the caring hands of a peace-making God. Friends, this is how peace can be imagined. Thank you for your kind attention.
Merci, archevêque Ernest, pour nous avoir donné un peu le contexte.
Thank you very much, Archbishop Ernest, for offering us this new framework, this new picture. We're not talking about a theoretical scenario here, but a way in which we must perceive reality, how we can proceed in the path of resistance to evil. So we've got time for a break now. We will take a break for 10 minutes. So think about any questions you might have. Then we will have 30 minutes for questions and answers. So a 10-minute break.
Yes, it just was